I think and I'm not talking about individual lawyers representing their customers. That is where you get high quality work and a lot of care. I'm talking about the industry and how it's set up.
Right.
And does it have a customer orientation? Does the legal industry say we exist because of the US public? They are our customer, they're our boss. No.
Today on LawNext, Avvo founder Mark Britton. Britton founded the often controversial company in 2006. Last January, he announced its sale to Internet Brands, a web behemoth that already owned a portfolio of legal sites including Nolo, Martindale-Hubbell, and Total Attorneys. A few months later, Britton left Avvo, writing in a memo to his staff, "It's time for me to go." This is Bob Ambrogi, and you're listening to LawNext, the podcast that profiles the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. We'll get to today's interview in just a moment, but first, let's hear from the sponsors who generously support LawNext. And now, on to this week's interview. And Mark Britton, welcome.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I should say for the benefit of our listeners that we are sitting here in the same room. I don't always get to sit in the same room with my interview subjects on this podcast, so happy to be able to see you.
Get to see you face to face.
Face to face. And it's not even the first time we've sat across microphone to microphone. We've done that a couple of times over the years.
We have.
But if it's okay with you, I'd like to kind of step back in time a little bit and talk about some of the origins of Avvo. You founded Avvo in 2007.
That's when we launched Avvo.
Yeah, I'll take it back. 2005, you founded it, I think. Is that right?
Well, 2005 started working on it. Really came together in 2006. Hired up the team in the summer of 2006. Launched it a year later.
Yeah.
But it all kind of...
I should say I first wrote about you in 2007. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, that's right. And you were one of the earliest people that we spoke with, and that was when you were doing Legal Talk Network with Craig
Williams.
Craig Williams, thank you.
Yep.
And you were a leading voice then, as you are now. So we appreciated you having us on the show, and what a relationship it's been over 12 years.
Well, actually, it was funny because we did the show really within a week or two of your launch, but it was when the lawsuit was filed. I mean, you launched, then you were hit with a class action lawsuit.
9 days later.
9 days later.
9 days later.
And we had the lawyer who brought that lawsuit, I think, on the show. And then I think a week later, we had you on to respond.
Which we thought was really fair. I actually don't remember the lawyer who filed the lawsuit being on, so maybe I blocked that out. But I just remember you wanting to one thing that I felt about that lawsuit was that the lawyers who filed the lawsuit were very media savvy. And we were media savvy in our own way, but we'd never really dealt with it through almost where there was a coordinated attack on our character. And so you were some of the first that came to us and said, hey, let's have a very balanced discussion around your product and the character of that product. So we felt that was one of the first times we felt like we had a chance to really tell our story.
I did think it was funny that just this year after I think it was after you announced that you were leaving, and I went back and looked up those lawyers and saw that they had both the lawyer who brought the lawsuit and the lawyer who was the lead plaintiff in that lawsuit had both claimed their Avvo profiles.
Sure.
So that seems some sort of poetic justice or something.
And probably got a lot of business through it, because I mean that's ultimately the only goal of Avvo was, on the one hand, to get consumers more information and guidance than they had ever had before, and on the other, get lawyers more business. And I think with everything, the really neat evolution and tipping point of Avvo is because we were aggressive in trying to push legal's hand, you had a lot of people feel that we were up to something nefarious. When in reality, it's just about putting the consumer and lawyer together in a more efficient way. And
what was the original concept? Before you actually started the company, before you were putting this down on paper, what were you thinking this was going to be?
Well, I mean, it's so basic in that I said Expedia. So I had been at Expedia for the last 5 years.
You'd been the general counsel?
I was a general counsel and moved over to the business side. And I was always very involved in the financial side of Expedia as well, and the regulatory side, government affairs. I started the government affairs team. And but if you think about travel, and that's really to not spend too much time on this, but Avvo is short for avvocato, which is lawyer in Italian. And I was living in Italy teaching. And when I think about why people called me, well, they were most from the States. They were most often calling me about legal issues. And I hadn't been a lawyer for some time. And so nobody ever called me for travel advice. And why is that? Right? I mean, clearly I know how to travel. I'm living over in Italy. And the light bulb went off for me that, well, if it relates to travel, you have all these consumer-oriented resources that are really easy to use. It's just intuitive. Travel, because we love travel and we love to think about travel, that there's that intuition that develops. Then there are the tools that are supporting that intuition, and so you just have a lot of efficiency. Whereas in law, most consumers just have no concept of how the law works. It's very frightening for them, and then there are no tools to compound it. So that's where the light bulb went off, and I just said, we need to build Expedia, an Expedia-like marketplace for lawyers. And that, everybody says you have to have this epiphany moment. I don't know if that's an epiphany moment or kind of a fizzle, but it was a moment where I said, ooh, I think I could build that.
Well, what did you see lacking? I mean, there was Martindale Hubbell. That arguably was a attempt at an Expedia-like site for lawyers and for consumers in those days. What wasn't available that you thought needed to be out there?
I think you had a lot of sites that mirrored the attitude of the legal industry. And what I mean by that is that if I have any frustration over being involved in the legal profession for the last 25, 26 years, is that I really don't believe that the legal profession, how it's set up, cares about its end user, which is the client. I think that you have certain clients that are very, very sophisticated, like big corporations that have a general counsel that can fend for themselves. But I think and I'm not talking about individual lawyers representing their customers. That is where you get high quality work and a lot of care. I'm talking about the industry and how it's set up. Right. And does it have a customer orientation? Does the legal industry say we exist because of the US public? They are our customer, they're our boss. No. So what you get in a lot of these websites is they were set up to display the information in a way that made the lawyers look better, not necessarily that made the consumers understand what those lawyers did and how the legal profession worked. And that maybe is the more important light bulb that went off for me, is I said, nobody's serving the consumer. I'd spent 5 years post-law firm experience in the most just swimming in this consumer goo that was the highly creative, early planetary goo of the travel industry and Expedia. And I was absolutely influenced by those big, big minds that all they ever asked was, is this good for the consumer?
So when you were preparing to launch Avvo, did you at all expect there to be the kind of backlash that you received when you launched it?
Yes, because I can remember telling investors that we will get sued because lawyers have a very low cost of overhead. And lawyers, as a general counsel, we even saw, in the travel business, we would get sued a lot by lawyers because they know how to file a lawsuit, and there's a low cost of overhead for them to do that in both time and money. So I knew that especially by rating lawyers, whether it was consumers rating lawyers or us having an editorial rating in the Avvo rating, I knew that lawsuits would come out of that. And I also believed, maybe too cavalierly, that because we were serving the consumer, whatever came out of that, whatever that lawsuit looked like, that we would be able to use that to our advantage to tell the story that we serve the consumer. What I didn't expect, and this goes back to what I said a couple of minutes ago, is those lawyers were so media savvy. They called down, so we got a bunch of press when we launched. They called down every single group that had interviewed us, every publication, and said, I think you've been sold well, I don't know exactly what they told them, but my sense from the questions I got back were that you've been sold a false bill of goods, and these guys are up to no good, and you have to tell the story.
Flat out scam was what John Henry Brown called it.
Okay. I mean, maybe they were that aggressive. I don't know, but
that's a quote. That's I forget where I got that, but that's what I got. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's a flamboyant. I mean, he lives in hyperbole from everything that I see.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he's a good lawyer because he has taken on some very big cases in the state, et cetera. But as it related to Avvo and his opinion of Avvo, it was just a huge miss.
Yeah.
He just didn't understand. In my opinion, he didn't understand the technology.
Well, what people didn't understand was the rating, I think. Don't you think that was a big part of it? I mean, there was the whole thing. I mean, again, a note I had from back when I was first writing about it was people jumped on the fact that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was given a 6.5 rating out of 10.
That was...
and how could RBG be a 6.5? Whereas you originally were ranked in 8, so you were higher than Ruth Bader. So people jumped on that kind of stuff.
But that's accurate.
No doubt.
It is. So the question was, what is the probability? What is the likelihood that this lawyer will represent you well? And maybe there's a bit of a miss in that as the algorithm, the signals that they're looking for. But, for the consumer that is engaging the law regarding consumer issues, bankruptcy, divorce, adoption, criminal, traffic tickets, all of these garden variety things, typically a Supreme Court justice does not generate the signal, and you probably don't want them representing you in that traffic ticket case. Right. And it's sold...
Just thinking of Antonin Scalia representing...
Right. And so that was the story it was telling, but it's very easy to attack that because people will say, oh, you're stack ranking lawyers. You're not talking about probabilities that they'll represent you well in this consumer environment. You're just stack ranking lawyers from 1 to 10. And the fact that you're putting in the middle of the pack Supreme Court justices, inherently, this is to quote John Henry Brown or JHB maybe, that it's a flat out scam. The beauty, and maybe, you mentioned last laugh, I don't know if it just became very gratifying when you saw both the consumers and the lawyers start to get it. I mean, in the end, like Avvo right now has around 350,000 lawyers that use it as a marketing platform.
Yeah.
And so, there was this tipping point where consumers just started flooding in and saying, oh, I get how these tools work for me. And lawyers saying, oh, I can communicate directly and tell a better story. And that's when it exploded. And so, there was some lack of understanding in the beginning, and maybe there was a bit of the system that was incomplete, but as we improved it over time, it just became a beautiful thing, and the beautiful thing that it is today.
Yeah. What about? The other criticism of the ratings was that lawyers were able to game it. What do you say to all the people who used to they would argue that the ratings are gamed?
So there is, first of all, you just can't pick any system that cannot be gamed. There is no system that cannot be gamed. And in fact, the more important that system is, the more that people will try to game it, like their taxes. The actuarial, so that's a very big rating type system. Actuarial stuff is attempted to be gamed, around insurance or, anytime there's an algorithm. Let's just take Google. I think Google is probably the most prominent, the most important rating system in our lives today. You use it every day, and you're using a rating system. There is a whole industry, a multi-billion-dollar industry that is focused on gaming that system. SEO, search engine optimization.
Right.
And it's because Google matters. So of course, when Avvo matters, people are going to try to game it. And it was a constant, and yes, I can absolutely pull up Google search results where I go, oh, that's a crap website that they're referring me to when I'm asking for financial advice or what have you. And you look at it and you're like, I've been to that before. How did that get to the top of the search results? Because they gamed the results. And so, yes, did we have onesies and twosies there where people gamed it? But we also had a team that went after that gaming, and it was a constant evolution. Felt a little bit like whack-a-mole of going after the gamers. They could it be gamed? Yes. Was it always gamed? No.
Yeah. So my recollection is that when Avvo started, it was primarily this lawyer directory, lawyer rating platform, and it clearly evolved beyond that over the years. When did you start to see that Avvo could be something bigger than what it started, or was that always part of the plan?
At least the Q&A was a big part of the plan. We knew we needed a content core that engaged the lawyers in some way. And so to the extent that you can build a situation, build a dynamic where so we talked about search engine optimization. One of the key pieces of search engine optimization is having content that the broader internet signals is valuable. So if you're starting a company, and Bob, we met today when I was counseling another young entrepreneur on starting a company, and I was telling him as you walked up that he needed to understand what his content proposition was in the middle, right? And so you need something that builds content for you that not only builds content for the marketplace so that people come there, but also serves both sides of the marketplace. So in our instance with Q&A, it's valuable because people come in and get free legal guidance. And on the other side for the lawyers, well, one, they're able to help those customers, but it also gives them a bit of branding. So the beauty of what was your original question? I lost it. So
when did you begin to see that Avvo could be something greater than just the directory? You said the Q&A was always part of.
We knew we needed that content core. Okay, but we knew also. So just so you know, the original idea for Avvo was to go more towards the directory side with Q&A. With Q&A as a content core. But kind of limit it to there because those two things worked really, really well in legal. Yeah. But then go after medical, go after financial advisors, et cetera.
And you actually did go after medical at some point for a while.
We did, and actually did quite well with medical. Really? So yeah, I don't remember the exact stats, but we had about, I think it was 12,000 doctors participating, and we had over 1 million monthly uniques. We just had so HealthTap bought the asset. We were trying to partner with two different companies, one of them being HealthTap, and they both came back and said, we want to buy this. And so we were somewhat opportunistic and sold it. And so, yes.
Oh, I don't think I realized that. I think I thought you had just started it and shut it down again.
HealthTap today, if you go Google HealthTap, that was Avvo Doctors.
Oh.
So it still is out there. The product's changed quite a bit since then. But anyway, so once we decided not to go after... so another thing that happened during the time that we were building doctors and lawyers. So one thing is we figured out that they were very different markets and that consumers didn't necessarily like to think about doctors and lawyers together. And doctors especially didn't like thinking about lawyers on the same side. But there was, once we realized that probably wasn't there wasn't this exponential or this synergy that went together with having those two things there, and we focused just on legal. While we were coming to that conclusion, Our legal business just went through another huge pop, like where just the viral element of it, for whatever reason, took off again. And our legal business was growing so quickly. I had to say to the company, "Hey, this is what got us here. This is what got us to the dance. We can't drop this." And that was another thing that drove the decision to focus just on legal. Once we did that, then that's where we thought about going deeper into content and other tools related just to legal beyond the directory and Q&A.
When you say the business, is that mostly advertising and sort of paid
yes.
listings and whatever, that sort of thing?
Yes. And, I have to be a little bit careful around confidentiality as it relates to Avvo's financials, et cetera. But the bread and butter business of Avvo was always the advertising business.
We'll get back to my interviews in just a moment. But first, let's take a break to hear from the sponsors who generously support LawNext. And now, let's continue this week's interview. There came the point at which you decided to launch initially Avvo Advisor, which was this legal advice by phone, and then expanded that, I guess you'd call it, expanded that into Avvo Legal Services,
yes.
which fixed fee,
yes.
Limited scope, legal representation. What was the decision-making process that got you to think you ought to do that, and head down that road?
So after spending, let's call it, maybe 5 years, 6 years. Well, no, that's not. Actually, much earlier than that. But we became much more educated as Avvo became big, and we were running this very large business within legal. And that probably happened at about the 5 or 6 year mark. It became clear to us that the market, that there was this huge latent legal market that just wasn't being served whatsoever. I mean, just you had a bunch of people not using lawyers. Right. So if you think about it, no matter what size you associate with the legal market, you see all sorts of numbers, but I do think that the dollars that flow through, it's this, it's hundreds of billions of dollars, right, of commerce that flows through the legal industry. And then you layer onto that data that people of high income, meaning $80-some thousand and up, half of them don't use lawyers. Well, simple math would tell you that if you could engage the other half, that whatever, let's just say that it's a $100 billion market, that can double to a $200 billion market just by engaging that other half. Even if you could engage half of the half, you're now at a $150 billion market, right? So,
there's some. The market that is engaged with lawyers tends to be the higher income and bigger spender, and those that aren't engaged with lawyers tend to be lower income.
No. For those that make $84,000 and up, half of them don't use lawyers at all. Yeah, right. At all. Okay. Because two biggest things that comes out of the research.
You're not talking about the low income market.
No,
you're talking about
that gets up into 80+%.
Yeah.
So and that's what just blows my mind. And we'll get back to Avvo Legal Services, but can you imagine any industry where less than 20% of the U.S. population uses it? Like, imagine if the U.S. medical system, less than 20% used the medical system, and instead they did it themselves or went to shamans, like whatever, midwives. Right. You would have the American Medical Association, you'd have the president talking about the greatest health crisis in the history in history. Leave it at that, period. Yeah. That's exactly what's going on in legal. Yeah. And yet I feel like at the highest levels in legal, everybody's kind of like, hey, it's just all going to work itself out. Right. And so that is one place where the legal profession just, it started to suffocate me over time because I couldn't get through. So one of the ways that we tried to get through, and we knew that we were forcing the legal industry's hand again a bit, But again, Carolyn Elephant wrote just the greatest piece a couple of years ago to say, wow, as I look back on what Avvo was and how frightening it was at the time and like how normal and commonplace it seems today, like these guys were really looking around the corner.
Yeah.
And you will not look around the corner. You will not push the industry forward if you don't push the envelope a little bit. So with Avvo Legal Services, we were totally comfortable with it from an ethical and legal standpoint. What I think we underestimated, and I still haven't answered your question of what got it started, and I'll get there, but I think what we underestimated was just how misperceived, once again, this would be by the lawyer side. And you had a lot of lawyers just saying this is going to undermine the profession.
Right.
When all it was designed to do. So to get to design, you have to understand what we were hearing over years and years of running in the legal profession. And what we were hearing, just screaming out of our sophisticated consumer research, was that people didn't use lawyers for two reasons. One, and I alluded to this earlier, they don't know what lawyers do. They have no idea how the legal profession works, and they especially, like lawyers, what do they even do? How do they even help me? That's number one.
Right.
But even with that lack of knowledge, they knew one thing about lawyers, and that's that they cost too much money.
Right.
So that is the brand for lawyers in the United States.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, this comes out of tons of Avvo research. It comes out of ABA research. It comes out of Rebecca Sandifer's research with what is her organization? I'm blanking on it. Can you tell I took the summer off?
Yeah, I'm blanking on it too right now.
And her think tank and LegalZoom has data on this, et cetera.
Yeah.
But everybody who's spending time and money in talking to consumers are realizing that there's a gargantuan gap between the consumer perception and really the problems being solved by the legal profession.
Right.
And that is no one's fault except the legal profession.
Yeah.
Right? So I said, okay, if that's the problem, and also just think about the struggle that so many law firms are having in getting business through the door because they can't build products. They don't know how to build products that are simple and streamlined that can deliver simple solutions at a low cost. Okay? And that's, by the way, LegalZoom exists because lawyers can't figure that out. Okay? So we said, rather than having LegalZoom send all this business to paralegals, to non-lawyers, let's create a LegalZoom type product that sends this to lawyers. Right. And so if you think of the legal services as a pyramid, if you think of legal services as a pyramid, you have entry level at the bottom of the pyramid where people are coming in with very basic needs. I just need a very basic will or an uncontested divorce, all the stuff that LegalZoom operates principally on the corporate side, all the way up to very complex bespoke legal services at the top of the pyramid. Yeah. Most of the miss and most of the disconnect is at that bottom of the pyramid, entry level.
Right.
And so the more that the whole hypothesis was for lawyers, if we can get more entry level people using lawyers, then that's going to feed up the pyramid over time, which will lead to more bespoke business for lawyers writ large. Right. And I think a large percentage of lawyers understood this inherently and were like, great, sign me up. Through a lot of bars, and really the more established lawyers that were feeding at the top of the pyramid, that weren't feeding at entry level, they created a narrative that said, this is hurting the legal profession. I mean, and through crazy stuff like it's technical violations of
fee sharing,
right? We're even having bars say to us, well, we know that as a practical matter, if we look at the spirit of the regulation, it's not violating that.
Yeah.
But if we look at the technical language, it's violating that.
Right.
And so that type of thinking, it just for me to say, listen, if you believe in serving the consumer and you want lawyers to have a greater share of that bottom of the pyramid of entry level to start the relationship so that over time they can develop into the bespoke business, they must be thinking like this, and we can help facilitate.
Yeah. I mean, the irony is, and you alluded to Carolyn Elephant's comment, but it does actually seem that the organized bar, especially recently, has kind of come around to this very idea. This is exactly what we need to be doing, what the bar needs to be doing, is to be making legal services available at low cost, at a limited scope. I mean, you probably saw, you said you had the summer off, so I don't know how much you've followed, but of course the Illinois Attorney Registry Disciplinary Commission that came out with this recommendation specifically regarding Avvo legal services that said, this is exactly what we need to be doing. I was just at a bar meeting in Utah where they were kind of saying the same thing. Saying, this is exactly the kind of stuff we need to be looking at and doing.
By the way, I don't know if I'll see it in the next 10 years. I don't know if we'll see it, but this will happen. It is gravity. And this is where the legal profession often cuts off its nose despite its face. They're so worried about quote unquote business people being involved in the law that if a lawyer didn't come up with it and run it, and even though I'm a lawyer, I had a lot of business people around me, that it's somehow going to either undermine consumers or undermine their revenue stream. And that's just sad because it's not being innovative in a way that pushes the profession forward for the benefit of lawyers.
Yeah. One of the things I remember you telling me, if I had this correct, was that one of the side effects of Avvo, although Avvo Legal Services was providing limited scope, fixed fee services, that in fact it had the effect of driving more business to lawyers because it created these relationships between clients and lawyers, and those relationships often led to other work for the lawyers that were not limited scope or not fixed fee services.
The biggest frustration that I saw coming with legal services, and this is before we were dealing with the bars who were just not being innovative. Honestly, I feel they were being lazy. They were just, we have a lot of bar members complaining and we don't necessarily understand this space. We're just going to say no. But the biggest concern that I had is lawyers were taking in clients at an Avvo Legal Services rate, which was very low. And then it was turning into a bunch of business behind it. The lawyers that succeeded in Avvo Legal Services loved it because they knew that that was just simply a mechanism to upsell into other stuff. And so they were like, this is the best deal ever. I don't have to pay for advertising. I don't have to pay a referral fee. I am just, I pay my fee, and I now have a client that is going to have all sorts of issues that is not associated with Avvo. They were just, they were having a party. And so we would have had to have figured out over time how the revenue that we were generating, how, the value that we were generating. But that's where it was just really challenging with the regulatory construct.
It just makes me wonder, through your years at Avvo, through a lot of these battles, how do you feel about legal ethics rules? I mean, is the whole idea of having ethics rules to regulate the profession, is it more obstructionist than it is constructive for the profession?
No, I think that the ethical rules are very important. I think that they're too complex, however. And so on something, lawyers and organizations that serve lawyers love to make things harder than they should be. And if the FTC has a very simple rule around, say, misleading advertising, so we have all these rules around what lawyers can and can't say and what they have to submit, and very protectionist, and it differs from state to state. But just the advertising rules alone, I think we should have that you just don't be fraudulent, don't say dishonest things, and then we can regulate based on whether they've said dishonest things or not. And so I feel that there's a lot of complexity there, and I feel that there is a tremendous lack of empathy for the legal consumer. And that's really, Bob, as one of the reasons that I was willing to sell the company, and one of the reasons that it was just time, as you mentioned, that I put in my letter to the company, is that I had tremendous fatigue around the industry not willing to pick up, to share the passion, to share the empathy for the legal consumer, and start pursuing solutions that would serve them in an appropriate way.
Yeah. So when you decided that it was time, what led you to Internet Brands?
So, well, Internet Brands has acquired something like 140 internet companies. So we knew who they were. So without getting too much into the backroom of how all of this evolves, when you have a successful company that is driving a lot of consumer eyeballs, that has a lot of lawyers on the other side, it is just really hard to build a marketplace. Inevitably, those companies that are very good at acquiring different companies and putting them together in unique and interesting ways. I mean, there's one art that is building a company up from scratch, and there's another art, especially in the web, of having a bunch of satellite companies and having them work together in an interesting way. LexBlog is really good at that latter one. Well, very good at building LexBlog, but LexBlog, who I know you do a lot of work with, is good at that network effect, right? Yeah. And that's what Internet Brands. So, there are companies, there are a lot of companies out there that Avvo would be a natural fit for their portfolio over time. So it's inevitable, whether it's driven by bankers who stop by or corporate development people for those companies, et cetera, that you start having these conversations at conferences, or they start. It's a nonstop. You have no idea over Avvo's life, especially when Avvo had really taken the title of being the consumer website. And really, when Lawyers.com and Martindale Hubbell couldn't keep up, and they sold to Internet Brands, coincidentally, that is when things, there was this sense of, okay, Avvo is leading the profession or leading this vertical in an interesting way. And just, I won't name names, but big companies that are internet related, or whether legal related or professional services related, we were always having discussions. And I'll leave it at that, other than to say we had a very interesting overture over the summer, and then that led to some discussions, that was not from Internet Brands, which led to a discussion with Internet Brands, and they were on it and worked quickly to get the deal done. So. Yeah.
Had you considered other kinds of exit strategies, or considered going public?
Oh, absolutely. That was kind of the goal we were going for. I think my dream for Avvo was to go public and run a public company, and so giving that up was hard. But I was tired. I'm still tired, just being totally honest. Yeah. I actually had with a friend, I sat down and had coffee with him yesterday, and I actually think I hit on the first idea to where I said, oh, no, that would be interesting. And so I've pretty much said to everybody that I don't think I have another company in me. And I was at that coffee yesterday, and I said, maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. Because it was so exciting when we hit on it together that I thought, that could be fun. So I don't know. I don't know what the future brings, but as it relates to Avvo and where it was, Internet Brands. So I'll finish with this thought. When you sell a company, your first interest is your shareholders. Then the next interest is the employees. Yeah. And then the next interest, which overlaps with the employees, is the marketplace. It's the product itself. Internet Brands seemed like a great place where shareholders could get their return. Employees could keep their job. Like, they needed Avvo as a hub. And as a consequence, their RIF that post-merger was right around 10%, which is very low in a merger. Yeah. I expected it to be higher. Yeah. And then I've not spent a lot of time on Avvo lately, but it seems like they continue to drive the product in a solid way.
Yeah. Although they shut down Avvo Legal Services. Were you surprised by that or disappointed?
No. They before I left, they were still trying to think through what they were going to do. But one thing that internet brands does very well is runs company. They keep it simple, stupid. They want to focus. We had a core business that just ran so beautifully, and focus on that core business because we are doing a lot of other stuff in other companies. You don't need to focus on that. You don't need to have this huge editorial content base. We have that through Nolo. You don't, and so. If you had asked me, I would have said they're going to shut down Avvo Legal Services. It's an investment, it's a headache, and what became clear to Josh King and me is, oh my God, like there is, you had bars that say we support this, we love it, it's great. They wouldn't necessarily go on record because nobody had asked them to say that they love it, right? Nobody had asked for an opinion. We could have submitted, but. The bars, we thought that there would be a tip of one or two bars that say, no, this is good, like Illinois. Yeah. And we had North Carolina very close on that as well. Yeah. And as we were waiting for that, and all of these other opinions started coming out, I knew we could succeed. It's just that finish line felt farther and farther away. Yeah. And so when you get to that, what it does is it makes you say, it's just something that I will tell you, Bob, that my greatest disappointment, hands down, is that we did not make Avvo Legal Services succeed. Yeah. It was so important for the profession. Yeah. And the profession just whiffed. Yeah. And the funny thing is, I think you're right that it's going to succeed. It just won't be called Avvo Legal Services. Yes. It's going to come back in some guys, and it's going to operate exactly as you. So maybe that's your next business. Yeah, I can't. I can't. Unless there's some major change, you can only help those who are willing to help themselves. Yeah. And the profession is just not the regulatory structure and the people running the regulatory structure and those that can influence those that regulate. Yeah. They're too obstinate. They're too fat and happy. They're too not worried about the consumer, and as a consequence, you have horrible industry dynamics. Yeah, and that's not every bar. Yeah, but every bar that issued an opinion, I would say that about. Yeah. So that's your greatest disappointment. What was your greatest? What do you see as either your greatest accomplishment as CEO or kind of the greatest legacy of Avvo under your leadership? The team I built, and even today, like I miss them horribly. There is such a luxury that comes with coming into a company like Avvo. And I mean, we really hired for innovative people. That innovation, intellectual curiosity, those were so important in the traits we were looking for. And so we had this culture where, it was just, think about the selfishness of this. I was able to come in every day to work and be around these incredibly smart people where their job was to kind of impress me. That sounds egotistical, but to give me all their best ideas, right? Yeah. And so as a CEO, I was just constantly flooded with all this big thinking. And oh God, I miss that so fundamentally. Yeah, you did have some good people, and a lot of your sort of more senior people left also. Yes. During this over the summer, before the beginning of the summer as well. Which is a bummer, but it's a natural thing that happens when companies are acquired. They don't need a bunch of senior teams sitting around. Yeah. If you were to, sounds like an Oprah question or something, but if you were to do it all over again with Avvo, is there anything you would do differently from the outset going forward? No. We killed it with Avvo. Yeah. We did. I actually said to one of our board members, I said, I think we executed about as well as you can execute in legal, as we were looking back on it as kind of post-sale. And because legal's hard. I remember early on when Benchmark invested in us, Bill Gurley, who is one of the, probably the most successful and best known investors in the country, saying to me that we're scouring the planet for great ideas in medical and legal because, and this was 12 years ago, because it's just hard. Like, to the extent that anyone comes up with novel, interesting ways to attack it, we're excited because those ideas are so few and far between. And the idea that we came up with a novel idea that grew it into this gargantuan platform. And really, we hit gargantuan status like 5 years in, maybe 6 years in.
Yeah.
And the fact that we did that from nothing, I just could not be prouder of what the team we assembled and how they executed.
Yeah. As you mentioned, when I met with you this afternoon, just before we started recording, you were sitting downstairs giving advice to somebody who's now starting his company. Is there sort of generic advice you give entrepreneurs, especially in the legal tech space? I know it's hard to do that, not knowing what the company or the product or the service might be, but what would you tell a young entrepreneur in this area?
What's interesting is there are a lot of people that want to start companies, and I give this piece of advice over and over and over. And when you know that it's time for you to start a company, that you're onto something, is when you know that you can't do anything else. And so I think the biggest thing that a lot of people, they say, well, I have this idea, I just don't know if it's good enough. It's not a question of whether the idea is good enough. It's whether you believe to the point where you think about it when you are in the shower in the morning, when you're eating your cereal, when you're working out, when it obsesses you, right? It is haunting. And I really noticed that in Avvo, it was tormenting me. It was this siren that when I would sleep, I was saying, you must build this. You must. It's so needed in the market, and it's such a miss for the industry. You can fill that gap. And as that siren just kept at it, I had no choice. And so for anyone that's considering themselves as an entrepreneur, I put rabbit ears around that, or thinking of starting a company, it is time when you can't do anything else.
So it's either go see a psychologist or start a company at that point.
Yeah. But it's hard to start a company, and it takes a lot of risk. And there are so many unknowns that you don't control that you will have to figure out over time.
Yeah.
It's only time to go down that road when you don't have any other choice, because whether it's destiny or whatever is powering you forward, ego, destiny, God, whatever is the element that you believe pulls you forward, you will know it, because it's like a vortex where you say, I can't, there's nothing, this is all consuming. And if I don't do this, I'm going to lose my mind. And this is why you have entrepreneurs who, they max out all their credit cards. Where people go, they are a major risk taker.
Yeah.
It's not a question of whether they're a risk taker. They had no choice.
Yeah.
This was going to, the siren was in their ear, and they just believed at such a deep level that that belief wills people to join their company. It wills the organization to build great product. It wills everyone to get over that hill when it just feels like roadblock after roadblock is in front of you. And as kind of a close, as I thought, my passion around Avvo Legal Services was so intense, but I definitely felt the legal profession with roadblock after roadblock. I felt like I was letting the team down because I was starting to lose my energy.
Yeah.
And that's probably when, for us collectively to say we shouldn't be doing Avvo Legal Services, is when, or a company more broadly, I'm not talking about Avvo. If you're starting a company or starting a product, if the principal person behind that is starting to lose steam, that's probably the time you should pull the plug on it.
Yeah. Well, I've said this before. I sincerely believe that Avvo as a company and you as a CEO moved the legal profession forward over the last decade and really in a lot of ways reshaped the legal profession. The legal world is not what it would not be what it is today, I don't think, if Avvo had existed.
I read that in your article, and I'll tell you, it's the most flattering thing or the nicest thing that someone's ever said to me. So thank you.
I honestly think it's objectively true. It's not even just trying to flatter something. I just think that because you were willing to push the envelope, and whether people agree with you or not, like you or not, they can't deny the fact that you pushed the envelope and that pushed everybody a few steps forward. Maybe not far enough forward for you.
It means a ton to me coming from you, really. Thank you.
Well, thanks. But I really appreciate your coming in here, taking the time to talk to me.
It's my pleasure. I love
pleasure
to
talk
talk, which is clear from this podcast, but you'll need to edit this down, I have a feeling.
Well, I'll look forward to your next company because I suspect there will be one coming down the road.
Time will tell.
Well, that does it for this episode of LawNext. This is Bob Ambrogi. If you like what you heard today, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a positive comment. And please sign up to receive future episodes. Thanks for listening.